For the first time in history, artificial intelligence has done what no archaeologist, no explorer, and no government has ever allowed. It looked inside the Great Pyramid of Giza without asking for permission. Using advanced AI-assisted 3D scanning technology combined with muon radiography, a team of international scientists recently mapped the internal structure of this ancient monument in extraordinary detail. And what they found didn't just surprise them. It shook the very foundation of everything mainstream Egyptology has told us for over a century. Hidden voids, unexplained chambers, architectural precision that defies the tools ancient Egyptians supposedly had, and a geometry so deliberate, so mathematically perfect, that calling it the work of basic hand tools and ropes begins to sound almost laughable. But here's the part that really gets under your skin. This technology didn't create the mystery. It confirmed one that's been quietly building for decades. Because long before AI entered the picture, independent researchers, geologists, and engineers had already been pointing at the same disturbing conclusions and being silenced for it. So tonight, we're going to follow the evidence, all of it, from what the AI scans actually revealed, to the sealed doors no one is allowed to open, to the one man who has spent decades making sure you never find out what's behind them. Because the question of who really built the Great Pyramid is no longer just a historical debate. Thanks to modern technology, it's becoming impossible to ignore. But before we reveal what the AI found, hit like and subscribe, because they don't want you to know this. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll never look at this monument the same way again. The official story and why it doesn't hold up. Let's start where every good investigation starts, with the story we've always been told. According to mainstream Egyptology, the Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2550 BC by Pharaoh Khufu, constructed as his royal tomb over approximately 20 years, using thousands of workers armed with copper chisels, wooden sledges, ropes, and sheer human determination. It's a tidy, confident explanation. Schools teach it, museums display it, documentaries repeat it. But here's what they don't tell you. Almost none of it is based on hard, verified evidence. Most of it is educated guesswork that hardened into fact simply because it was repeated often enough. Think about that for a second. The most famous structure on Earth. And we can't actually prove who built it. For starters, there isn't a single clear inscription from Khufu's era that explicitly states he built the pyramid. Ancient Egyptians documented everything: daily life, religious ceremonies, royal conquests, even agricultural records. They were meticulous. Yet somehow, the construction of their greatest achievement left behind almost no written record. The few markings that do exist were discovered deep inside hidden chambers, found not in ancient times but hundreds of years after the pyramid was first explored. That alone should give us pause. And then there's the tomb problem. If this was truly Khufu's burial monument, where is everything that belongs in an Egyptian royal tomb? Where are the treasures, the funerary artifacts, the elaborate inscriptions glorifying the pharaoh? And most importantly, where are his remains? Every other known royal tomb in Egypt is filled with these things. The Great Pyramid has none of them, not one. The so-called King's Chamber is essentially an empty stone box in an empty stone room. That's not a tomb. That's something else entirely. And that something else is what this whole investigation is really about. The precision that shouldn't exist. Now, here's where things start getting genuinely unsettling. Even if we set aside the missing inscriptions and the absent burial evidence, we still have to explain the pyramid itself. And that turns out to be the hardest part of all. The Great Pyramid aligns with true north to within a fraction of a single degree. Not approximately, not roughly, a fraction of a degree. Modern engineers using GPS and laser technology would be proud of that result. The idea that ancient builders achieved it with sticks and stars is at minimum extraordinary, but the alignment is actually the easy part to swallow. The stonework is where the official story really begins to crack. Inside the pyramid, particularly in the king's chamber, researcher and engineer Christopher Dunn spent years meticulously studying the granite blocks. What he found was deeply puzzling. Perfectly circular drill holes, smooth machined surfaces, cut marks with a precision and consistency that match modern industrial tooling far more than they match hand-carved ancient stonework. Dunn wasn't some fringe internet theorist. He was a manufacturing engineer who spent his career working with precision machinery, and he knew what he was looking at. Granite, for context, is one of the hardest stones on Earth. Copper, which is what ancient Egyptian tools were made from, is dramatically softer than granite. You can't machine granite with copper tools the way these stones were worked. Modern researchers who have actually tried to replicate these cuts using period-accurate copper chisels failed completely. Their tools wore out within minutes. After days of effort, the progress was measured in millimeters. So, the question isn't just how they did it. The question is, how did they do it that well? And there's one more detail that most people walk right past. Inside the pyramid's chambers and tunnels, there is not a single trace of soot on the ceilings or walls. Not a scorch mark, not a smoke stain, nothing. If thousands of workers spent years inside these passages using torches and oil lamps, those ceilings would be black. Every cave, every ancient tunnel, every underground space where fire was used shows this evidence. The pyramids don't, which means either the builders had a source of light we haven't identified yet, or the construction happened in a way that doesn't involve people with torches standing inside while it was being built. Both possibilities are remarkable. What the AI scan actually found. This brings us to the discovery that reignited all of these questions in a very public way. In 2017, an international team of scientists launched the Scanned Pyramids project, using muon radiography, a technology that uses cosmic ray particles to image the interior of dense structures. Essentially an MRI for ancient monuments. The results were peer-reviewed and published in the journal Nature, so this wasn't fringe science. This was as mainstream as it gets. And what they found was a massive, previously unknown void hidden deep inside the pyramid, located just above the Grand Gallery. We're talking about a space roughly 30 meters long, with a cross-section comparable to the Grand Gallery itself. It's enormous, and it has no entrance, no known access point, no explanation in the official architectural record whatsoever. Scientists called it one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in modern history. The world waited for the follow-up. The excavation announcement, the exploration mission. It never came. Egyptian authorities acknowledged the discovery, expressed polite interest, and then quietly made sure nothing further happened. Requests from international research teams for permission to investigate have been repeatedly denied, citing concerns about safety and preservation. And while those concerns might sound reasonable on the surface, they raise an uncomfortable question. If there's nothing significant in there, why not let someone go and confirm that? The sealed doors found earlier by German engineer Rudolf Gantenbrink tell a similar story. Back in the 1990s, his small robotic camera exploring the Queen's chamber shafts found a limestone door fitted with copper handles, the only metal fittings ever found inside the pyramid. The world held its breath. Egyptian authorities shut the project down immediately. A decade later, a National Geographic team was finally allowed to drill through it, only to find a second sealed door behind the first. That second door has not been touched since. No further investigation has been permitted. 2 sealed doors. a hidden chamber the size of a large hall, and a wall of official silence around both of them. At some point, preservation concerns stops being a satisfying explanation. The Sphinx is even older, and if the pyramid's secrets weren't enough, the monument sitting right next to it may be blowing the entire official timeline wide open. Geologist Dr. Robert Schoch, a professor at Boston University, spent years studying the weathering patterns on the body of the Great Sphinx. What he found, supported by John Anthony West, who first proposed the idea, was that the erosion on the Sphinx's enclosure walls wasn't caused by wind and sand, as Egyptologists had always assumed. The patterns were clearly caused by prolonged, heavy rainfall and water runoff, the kind of deep vertical erosion you only get from centuries of serious precipitation. Here's the problem with that. The last time the Sahara Desert received enough rainfall to produce that kind of erosion was over 12,000 years ago, at the end of the last ice age. The Egypt we know, the Egypt of the pharaohs and the pyramids, existed in a desert. It didn't have that kind of rainfall. Whatever civilization carved the Sphinx did so in a much earlier, much wetter period of Earth's history. When Schoch presented this evidence at a geological conference, the geologists sided with him. The erosion patterns were clear to anyone trained to read them. The Egyptologists, on the other hand, largely refused to engage with it. One historian famously described the situation by saying that Schoch had pulled the rug from beneath the feet of mainstream archaeology, and their response was simply to hope it would go away. It hasn't gone away, because if the Sphinx predates the pyramid civilization by thousands of years, then whoever carved it was not the Egypt we know. It was someone else. Something else. A civilization we have no record of. The gatekeeper. Which brings us to the man who has spent decades making absolutely sure we don't dig too deep into any of this. Dr. Zehi Hawass is Egypt's most famous archaeologist, and for good reason. He's charismatic, passionate about Egyptian history, and has done more to promote global interest in ancient Egypt than almost anyone alive. For years, he served as Secretary General of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities and as Minister of Antiquities, positions that gave him near total authority over who could excavate, who could research, and what could be published. And he used that authority aggressively. Independent researchers who proposed alternative timelines or challenged the official narrative found their access revoked, their permits denied, and their work publicly dismissed. Robert Bauval, whose Orion correlation theory we'll come to in a moment, faced significant institutional resistance. Robert Schoch's water erosion findings were publicly ridiculed by Hawass, despite being geologically sound. Even when international scientific teams made discoveries as significant as the 2017 void scan, Hawass's influence over Egyptian archaeological policy helped ensure nothing further was explored. Now, to be fair, some of this can be explained by legitimate concern. Egypt's heritage has been exploited, looted, and sensationalized for centuries, and having a fierce protector of that heritage isn't automatically sinister. But protection and obstruction are different things, and the pattern here is hard to explain away. Every time a discovery threatens the official narrative, the doors close. Every time an independent researcher gets close to something significant, access disappears. At some point, you have to ask whether what's being protected is Egypt's heritage or Egypt's story. The alternative theories that keep getting stronger. So, if the official story has this many holes, what are the alternatives? And why do they keep getting harder to dismiss? Let's start with Robert Bauval's Orion correlation theory, because it's one of the most visually striking pieces of evidence in this entire debate. Boval noticed that the layout of the three main Giza pyramids isn't random. They mirror the three stars of Orion's belt with remarkable precision, not just in their positions relative to each other, but in their alignment to the Nile, which mirrors the Milky Way. That alone is extraordinary. But here's the detail that changes everything. The alignment doesn't match Orion's belt, as it appeared in 2500 BC, when the pyramids were supposedly built. It matches the constellation's position as it appeared around 10,500 BC, 7,000 years earlier. The ancient Egyptians clearly understood astronomical precession, the slow wobble of the Earth's axis that shifts star positions over thousands of years. They built a monument that encoded a date in the sky, and the date they encoded was long before their civilization existed. Building on that, Graham Hancock has spent decades arguing for the existence of a lost advanced civilization, one that reached a high level of sophistication before being largely destroyed by a global catastrophe at the end of the last ice age, approximately 12,000 years ago. Hancock points to sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, a complex of carved stone temples dating to exactly that period, as proof that sophisticated human culture existed far earlier than the mainstream timeline accepts. His argument is that survivors of this civilization carried their knowledge forward, eventually seeding the early Egyptians with mathematics, astronomy, and architectural techniques that otherwise have no developmental history. Ancient Egyptian high culture appears in the archaeological record almost fully formed, with very little gradual evolution preceding it. That's unusual for any civilization, and it's exactly what you'd expect if the knowledge was inherited rather than developed. Then there's the physical evidence that's hardest to argue with. The Osirian Temple at Abydos, built from massive granite blocks with the same precision tooling found inside the Great Pyramid. The Serapeum of Saqqara, where enormous granite boxes, each weighing up to 70 tons, were carved with tolerances so tight you cannot slip a piece of paper between the lid and the box. The inside surfaces are perfectly flat to within a fraction of a millimeter. Modern machinists have examined these boxes and confirmed that replicating them with Bronze Age tools would be essentially impossible. These aren't fringe claims. They're measurable physical facts that simply don't fit the timeline we've been given. What it all means. So let's pull all of this together, because the picture that emerges is both remarkable and a little uncomfortable. We have a monument with no confirmed builder, no burial evidence, and no construction records, despite a civilization famous for documenting everything. We have stonework that modern engineers struggle to explain, precision that defies the tools supposedly used, and interior surfaces with no trace of the lighting that would have been required to build them. We have hidden chambers that technology has confirmed exist, but that no one has been allowed to enter. We have sealed doors behind sealed doors that have sat untouched for decades. We have a sphinx whose erosion patterns place its construction thousands of years before the Egypt of the pharaohs. And we have astronomical alignments that point not to 2500 BC, but to 10,500 BC. None of these individually destroys the official narrative. But all of them together, that's a very different conversation. The most conservative interpretation is that ancient Egyptians were significantly more sophisticated than we've given them credit for, that their knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, and engineering was far advanced beyond what survives in the written record, and that we've consistently underestimated what was possible without modern technology. The more radical interpretation, one that's gaining increasing credibility with each new discovery, is that the Egyptians inherited this knowledge. That before the civilization we call ancient Egypt, there was another one, older, more advanced, and now almost entirely lost to time. That the pyramids, the Sphinx, and the precision structures scattered across the Egyptian landscape weren't built from scratch by Bronze Age craftsmen, but were either constructed by this earlier civilization or built by the Egyptians using knowledge passed down from it. The AI scans didn't give us the answer, but they confirmed that there are answers hidden inside that monument. Answers that someone, somewhere, has been very careful to make sure we never find. Here's the thing about secrets. They don't last forever. They just outlast the people trying to keep them. The technology that gave us muon radiography, AI-assisted structural analysis, ground-penetrating radar, and precision geological dating is only getting more powerful. The tools that allowed a small team of scientists to map a hidden chamber inside the world's most famous monument without touching a single stone are now available to researchers around the world. You cannot indefinitely control what science eventually finds. The sealed doors will one day be opened. The hidden void will one day be explored. And when that happens, whatever is inside will either confirm the story we've been told, or it will rewrite it entirely. Given everything we've just covered, which outcome do you think is more likely? The Great Pyramid of Giza has stood for nearly 5,000 years, silently holding whatever it was built to hold. Empires have risen and fallen around it. Entire civilizations have forgotten themselves and been forgotten by others. But this monument remains, perfectly aligned, precisely engineered, and still, after all this time, not fully understood. Maybe that's the most extraordinary thing about it. Not just that it was built, but that after everything humanity has thrown at it, war, time, technology, determined archaeologists, and equally determined gatekeepers, it still hasn't given up its secret, but it's getting closer. And when it finally does, I have a feeling the truth will be worth every year of waiting. If you want to keep following this story, subscribe and hit the bell. We cover ancient mysteries, suppressed discoveries, and the questions mainstream history would rather you didn't ask. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.